Thank you, thank you.
I suppose I don't need this anymore. I'm going to go back, but thank you. I have no idea what you said. I'm hoping it's good. But good morning, everybody. Thank you for spending the next hour with me here. It's my pleasure being here. I had to cut my vacation short from in Maui to be here, so hopefully this will be good. Thank you also to Dylan and the rest of the Hack in the Box crew for having me here. I've had a great time in Malaysia so far, and we're going to have some fun during this talk, and perhaps even give everybody a newfound level of paranoia. That seems to be what I do these days. We're going to be talking about clickjacking and general web security. We're going to cover a lot of ground, and it's going to be applicable to probably everybody in the room. Unless you're not online, don't use a web browser or never visited a website ever. And so we're going to see some new things some of you probably have seen in the press. So when you break down web security, when anybody talks about web security, and web security is a very, very broad subject, you have to really take web security in two buckets. One is the security of the website, and the other one is the security of the browser. You have these two parts. You also have multiple parties. You have the website owner, the developer, you got third-party widgets and things like that. You have the end user and also the browser manufacturers, and you all have competing interests. But when you break it down, you have the websites and you have the web browsers. Now, when it's all said and done, a website must be able to protect itself from a hostile web user. And this is possible. You might have heard of things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery. We want to protect the website no matter what a user with a browser or telnet can do to these websites. And if you take great care in developing a website securely and use all the best practices and things nobody's heard of yet, you can actually make a fairly secure website. Browsers, it's different, okay? And there's a symbiotic relationship between a website and a web browser, but a web browser must be able to protect itself from a hostile web page, because what you're doing is when you're visiting a website, you're downloading HTML, cascading style sheets, JavaScript, Flash, and God knows what else. And you are expected to interpret the data and display it in such a way that it's visible but also safe. The problem is, while we have control of the security of the websites if you're building them, but as a user of a web browser, you actually don't have a whole lot of control over the security of the web browser. Right now, and I will try to prove this point to you, there's actually no way for you to protect yourself online using any one of these particular web browsers. It's really, really difficult for the most savvy of users, impossible for the average home user. And there's a symbiotic relationship here. Web security does not work, as a fundamental concept if either one of these things is not true. So we're going to start to look at the state of browser security and also the state of website security. But one way to look at it is from a recent report. This is the state of web security. This was done by a combination of people working with Google because they have lots of web browser traffic, and they were looking at it. And they wanted to see how secure the average browsers were, using statistics on looking at what is the most secure version of the browser, with all the plugins, and seeing how many people had the most secure browser out there. And they have a bunch of different graphs that delineate it by the type and version. But when it was all said and done, they found out that about 40% of the users out there in the world, which is something like 637 million people surveyed, 40% of them did not surf with over 40% of them surfed with something unsafe, something non-secure, even though all the patches were available out there. So we might have everything patched out there. We have a bunch of vulnerabilities, memory stack issues in different browsers, and we'll get to that. And while the browser manufacturers have done a really good job addressing these, to some reasonable extent, that's where they focus, no memory issues. There's a whole other layer of semantic type flaws in just the way the web works that they haven't addressed, and I won't say they ignore it, but it's certainly not addressed, and we're going to get to those as well. So, but for the bad guys, if you want to get on a user's machine, the browser is the easiest and fastest way to do it. What the bad guys are now figuring out is that the best way to get to it is through web vulnerabilities. Now, this particular slide here is developed with statistics that I find with the statistics we gather at White Hat. We run a service where we assess lots and lots of websites all the time. And the way to read this slide is 67% of the sites we look at have, well, let's say cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. Another 17% have SQL injection vulnerabilities. And these aren't the mom and pop websites, e-commerce sites, or blogs. These are the most popular sites on the web, the ones that are the most trafficked. So if you want to put malware on a site, the bad guys just, well, we don't have to host fake websites anymore. Let's just hack the real ones. So myself, White Hat, and a bunch of other web security experts out there were sounding this alarm for several years, and not a whole lot of people took notice, especially the website owners. So what has happened since, and you've probably seen this also in the media, is that we have mass SQL injections out there as one type of example. So the way these work, and a lot of you probably already know this, is that the bad guys will do some search engine searches using Google, looking for weak targets. They'll look for old ASP Classic websites or old PHP websites. And what they'll do is they've developed a generic way to inject, using SQL injection, JavaScript code into the database of these websites, filling up all the tables. So what happens is when the site is now delivering HTML to the user, it has a little bit of an iframe in there, so when you visit the site, iframes in browser-based malware to exploit QuickTime, IE, Flash, or whatever else. They'll load up as many exploits as they can and put some malware on the machine, turn it into a botnet, and then start exploiting more machines. And this has been going on probably for the last 18 months, and it's been getting worse and worse. Right now, the best statistics that are out there say about 79 or closer to 80% of the websites that are out there that are serving up malware now are legitimate websites. These are not sites that the bad guy just put up and hoping somebody stumble across it. These are legitimate websites. This is the United Nations websites, the Department of Homeland Security websites, the Sony PlayStation website, the ones that are frequented a lot. So when malware is getting distributed out there, it's because of insecure websites and also insecure browsers. So as this goes on, what do the bad guys, what do the good guys do? What do the experts say? What do the experts do? So I've conducted a bunch of surveys on my blog, just asking web security people out there what types of precautions they do. And I asked them this question. I'm sorry it's a little small, so I'll read it. It says, is the average web user capable of protecting themselves or their web browser from being exploited from cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, JavaScript malware, browser exploits, etc.? Now, almost nobody said that most of them could. Only some of them said some could. Most of them, over 80% of people, let's say, was that 80, something like that, 80, 90% said there is very few who could, or absolutely no way. There's actually no way. So they agree. There's no way a user can protect themselves no matter what it is that they do or how fast they patch. So I asked a follow-up question on this because this got me pretty interested. I wanted to see what they do. What do the experts do to protect themselves online? Because I think it lends context to our discussion here. I asked them, what is your personal approach to web browser security? How do you protect yourself? About 25% virtualize their browser now, according to my survey, and this is, I want to say, about 350 people. Over 60% have security add-ons. Others, over half, use multiple web browsers for doing different things. Others will disable JavaScript, Flash, and JavaScript across the board, and some percentage of them still use Lynx, the old text-based browser. Now, I want you to take a look at this. 1/4 of people out there experts virtualize their web browsers. What does that mean? That means they've given up that patching works. They're expecting their browser to get exploited and something to try to get installed on their machine. So they've taken the next best approach to it, is they virtualize it and restart the session, every so often, however they feel the need. So that says a lot about how they perceive the current state of browser security. So we're still going over all ground here. So, but what is the moral of the story here? Well, one, we have to fix our websites, find the vulnerabilities and fix them before the bad guys give us a bad day, and also patch your browsers. But in the larger scheme of things, how much does that really help? While we can patch against the normal memory-based issues, there's also those semantic-type flaws that are still very much out there. For instance, right now, if you visited a web blog that, well, let's say myself or any site that I control with some JavaScript, we can still steal your browser history, and I'll show you how that works. We can still do intranet hacking. We can tell what sites you're logged into. We can generate web worms. We can generate phishing websites that are on the real website, not the fake one, using cross-site scripting. We can steal passwords. We can session hijack, force you to access illegal content, turning you into a criminal, or hack third-party websites. This is not brand new cutting-edge stuff. We've known about this for 5 years. So I'm going to go over this stuff because, again, this is going to push forward. This requires no clicks from the user's perspective. You land on a website, that is what's possible. So for instance, and some of you might know this, others might not, but it's going to be relevant here. If you want to show you how easy this stuff actually is, if you want to steal the user's history or see what sites that they visited, it's very easy to do. Get a long list of URLs, a long list of all the web banks you can find, all the social networks you can find, every e-commerce site, and generate a gigantic list, thousands of them. And you just use these particular lines of code here to check the actual computed color of the link when it's displayed on the screen. That's all you have to do. If it's blue, the user has never been there. If it's purple, they have. Doesn't get any simpler than that. And you can actually tell what sites they visit. So if you see a user come to your site, we'll call them the victim, and you want to force them to make a request to a web bank, cross-site request forgery them, and you don't know what web bank, you just use this little trick and find the web bank that they use and target your attacks there. That's all it really takes, and this has gone unaddressed for, I want to say, 5, 6 years, if not more. Now, this does require a little bit of JavaScript, so a lot of people said, or at least the experts that said, oh, we'll just add no script and we'll be good. And then we have this little trick here. You can actually perform the same type of attack even if JavaScript is disabled using some cascading style sheet trickery. At the bottom there, you put in your gigantic list of URLs, again, all the web banks, social networks that you want, and you put a little visited pseudo class in cascading style sheets. And what happens is, if that link down there has been visited, it'll fire off that background handler there and send a request to the bad guy, letting the bad guy know what sites that you've been to. So even if you turn off JavaScript, it really doesn't matter. You can still tell what sites the user has been to and focus your targeted there. So we have a huge privacy violation here that has gone unaddressed. Now, what we found in just doing some spotty research here and there, running different homemade plugins and checking on the web who's using these types of hacks, it's actually not the bad guys. It's actually the rogue marketers out there. When they serve up banner advertisements, they'll actually use code like this to target advertising based upon the sites that you visit. And other people have carried this forward to determine what gender you tend to be based upon what sites you frequent. Okay. Now, let's carry this a little further. So we're still back in 2004 era. Let's come up to 2006, intranet hacking. We have firewalls. We have perimeter networks with firewalls all around them, keeping things nice and secure. We don't allow things from the outside connecting internally to our network because that's not a good idea. You don't want to share your printer with the rest of the world. But the web has a way of flattening things. So if you want to attack an intranet site, the easiest and best way to do it that we found on the web is that when a user goes out to visiting a website, let's say it's littered with JavaScript malware, a MySpace profile, a Facebook profile, they hit the website and they download the JavaScript and it executes in their browser from behind the firewall. From that point, there is no firewall. It doesn't exist. The code that's on the web page is now executing in behind the firewall. And using some, we'll use some applets first to try this out, and I'll show you how the JavaScript works. We can then use JavaScript to start making connections to other web-based interfaces inside the network. DSL routers, printer interfaces, IP phones, anything with a web interface, and everything has a web interface these days. And what do we know about the inside of a network? No one really takes care of these things because you can't connect to these things from an outside world. So no one really tends to patch the inside of the network. And every user on your enterprise that connects to the web from that network is a conduit for the bad guy. So this is how easy it is to get the internal NATed IP of a client of a browser in Java. So you can use this myAddress class. It's freely available JavaScript class. You can actually call it from JavaScript if you want. But you just create a quick socket call in Java and set it up and pull up the internal NATed IP address and off you go. And you can connect to any internal sites that you want. And if for some reason they don't have Java turned on, which is more or less rare, you can still guess at the IPs because internal NATed IPs are RFC compliant normally on the 192 networks or the 10 networks, and you start connecting. Then you could just start scanning for JavaScript. Imagine JavaScript can port scan. This is how much power JavaScript has in the browser. What you can do is you can script source in a particular internal NATed IP address. If there's HTML listening on that particular IP, it will respond with HTML and get loaded in the JavaScript interpreter, causing an error. If an error exists, you know there's a web server listening there. If it just times out, there will be no error, so you know there's not a web server there. And you just start cycling through as many IPs as you want. You can scan a whole class C using JavaScript, looking for web servers, vulnerable or not, in about a minute of time. So it's very easy to do port scanning, intranet port scanning. So again, a user goes to a rogue blog, a MySpace profile, and all of a sudden they're scanning your internal network and exploiting if they want. One more, we'll do two more little tricks here. We'll do some live demos later. If you want to tell where a user is logged in, there's different ways to do it. I'll show you just one. Let's say we're looking at that particular URL there, the mail.google.com. This is a particular URL that's static, and will give you two different types of content depending on whether or not you're logged in. If you're logged in, it'll show you your Gmail. If you're not logged in, it'll show you the login screen. You script source that in, and what happens is, depending on the state of the user, logged in or not, it'll cause the JavaScript interpreter to error on two different lines. If they're logged in, it'll error on line 8. If they're not logged in, it'll error on line 1. You just do some JavaScript checking, and you can actually see if they're logged in or not. If they're logged in, cross-site request forgery away, do things that they didn't intend to do. And you can do this on most any website out there. Different browsers are vulnerable to this, different versions. You just kind of got to play with it, but it's still very much alive and well out there. And for whatever reason, if they have JavaScript disabled, you can still do it without. You can still do internal port scanning without JavaScript because HTML has a way of pausing at different times. For instance, let's say a user went to a particular bad guy's website. They would give them these two tags right here. One is a style sheet reference tag pointing to an internal reference, and the other one is an image source pointing back to the bad guy with a timestamp on it when this page was delivered. What happens is when the browser renders these two particular links, if this 192 site is up, if it's up, it'll respond very quickly, just with HTML and not with cascading style sheets, but it'll respond very quickly, causing the next image source to respond really quickly. So if the timestamp is very close to when the next request came in, you know the server was up. But if for whatever reason that site is not up, the browser will hang for about 10 seconds, then time out and skip over it and then hit the image source. So you can actually do HTML timing-based attacks and do port scanning without the need for JavaScript. Now at this point, people are, a lot of times will say, well, is this stuff used in the wild? How prevalent is it? But and it's very hard to see, but we do know it has happened at least once with drive-by farming to do internet scanning. What the bad guys were doing was sending e-greeting cards to a bunch of users in Mexico. The users would click on these e-greeting cards, load up the page. JavaScript would then exploit the internal web interface to their DSL routers and update their DNS settings for several web banks. So the next time they went to the web banks, all the traffic went through the bad guys' sites. So all very easy to do, very simple to pull off, very hard to spot in the wild because it doesn't leave any traces or tracks. So this is what's going on out there. So we left this alone because the browser guys, as good as security guys want to be there, I mean, they're taking care of the syntactical attacks, but not the semantic ones. So I've kind of left that alone over the last year. And at Black Hat, I was starting to focus more on the semantic attacks of the business logic of websites, how to make a lot of money online, not using cross-site scripting, SQL injection, or any of the tricks. And other people out there, one at White Hat was doing more encoded types of attacks and how to code our current attacks like SQL injection and make them work again, even though people have taken measures to go against it. And Robert R. Snake Hansen and also Tom Strassner have been looking more at exploiting Google gadgets and Web 2.0 type stuff. And they got to a certain point where there was an older type of attack that it became useful. And this is where we get to clickjacking here. So I went back and I helped out Robert create some of this new clickjacking exploit code. So this is where we want to get to. Clickjacking, the new hotness. It's hard to get away from it in the press right now. Sorry about that. Didn't mean for it to get that way. So I'm going to tell you the story of how it happened for us from our perspective. But if you look at the Google Trends now, it seems clickjacking is on the same is way more popular now than cross-site request forgery, and just as popular as cross-site scripting, which is crazy to me. And now if you just do a search for clickjacking in Google, there's over 700,000 references to it, which is kind of insane considering that we just started talking about it about a month ago. So what is this clickjacking stuff, and why are we here? You know, for those that have laptops with webcams, you will care. Think of any button on any website, something that's particularly sensitive. This could be the wire transfer button on a bank, a PayPal button, a Twitter follow me button, your Netflix queue, a banner, any particular button online that you want to be clicking yourself and you don't want to be tricked into clicking. We're going to clickjack those. Now consider for a moment that JavaScript can now iframe in and take this button and hover it just under the mouse over any content on the web page where the user can't see it. So what clickjacking does is enable other types of attacks. And the more we research this, the more powerful the attacks got. You know, the sky was the limit, and when we saw the potential, it got a little scary. So just to visualize how this works, you have a page that the bad guy controls, or maybe they just control a piece of the content on it, a banner advertisement. They load in some JavaScript, and they iframe in a piece of code. Let's say the friend approval on MySpace. They iframe in this particular button, position the button exactly where they want it, and change the opacity so you can't see it, and it follows the mouse. Next time you click somewhere on the screen, you're actually clicking approve or follow or whatever the button tends to be. So again, just consider for a moment all the buttons that a bad guy might want you to press. The bad guy doesn't control the act of you clicking down the mouse, but they certainly control what it is that you click on. So we're going to start with some very simple examples to see how this works. So I'm going to drop out of this here and move you over to my browser here so you can see how this sets up. And we'll go through several demos here. So for instance, how a bad guy might want to use this. So for instance, let's say you want to monetize a little bit with Google advertising. You can have a page that you set up, and all it does is follow the mouse. You want somebody to click on your ads? No problem. You just follow the mouse around. You know, Google will say, or all the advertisers will say, oh, we have click fraud under control. I don't think so. The bad guys have known about this type of thing for a long while. So again, anywhere they click, they would click on the ad. If you want to make a story popular, if you have a particular blog post and you want to, just force a user to click on it, they will click on it. And again, I'm going to show you the code here real quick to somebody so you can see how simple this stuff actually is. Let's see here. So again, this is all of the code it takes, just some JavaScript to follow the mouse. If you guys want this code, let me know. It's really not all that difficult to put together, and my JavaScript skills are not great. So if we want to change the opacity, you just, let's see here. Actually, this probably won't work. I'll show you the opacity later because we're actually referencing it remotely, and I don't want to screw it up. So we have all that you can click. Let's say you can clickjack in YouTube rating systems, Netflix queues, all sorts of things. So it's quite interesting what you can do with this stuff. So we started messing around with this stuff. So let's go click through a couple of demos here. We did the dig one. So we, just to give you an idea of all the different buttons out there, there's, again, the dig stuff, the internal router buttons on your D-Links. There's, let's see, look at a few more here. There, if you use WebEx, you can get control over the user's desktop. There's social networking ones, but just think about all these buttons that a user might want you to click on. And there's lots of different proof of concept codes that people have put out there, and I'll give references to a couple. Sir Darkit, Thornmaker, and Gareth Hayes have done a lot of work with this stuff. Also, PDP has done quite a bit. Now, we were developing this stuff, so we can present it at some point forward. So we're keeping this, to ourselves and things that we were developing. And the other side effect that clickjacking has is that it bypasses cross-site request forgery token-based protection. For those that are not familiar with cross-site request forgery, you take a sensitive request, let's say a wire transfer link, or to your bank, and you put it in an image source or some tag, and you force the user to make a request they didn't intend to make. This, again, could be a wire transfer, hack the White House website, or anything you want, really, and force the user to make this request. Now, the way developers will defend against this attack is that they will put token-based protection. They will make a little token on the end of the URL that's tied to that user's session, so no request is the same for each user. They token-based protect it. The problem with clickjacking is it's the real user clicking on the real button on the real web page. So the token-based CSRF protection is null and void. So we started researching this and sharing our results around, but for years we actually found out way later that this type of issue has been known, registered on Bugzilla, the Mozilla project, this exact attack, but it was, from our understanding, it was misunderstood, underestimated, and long forgotten. We got to this point and said, this stuff is kind of compelling. We could do some cool stuff with this, but certainly not enough for a good presentation or a white paper. So we started to go a bit beyond. What else can we do with this stuff? Now, let me take a moment here. How many people here have, let's say, a computer with a webcam built in? Raise a hand, please. How many? A few? Okay, cool. Keep your hands up. How many people with a microphone? Okay, the rest of you don't have laptops? Okay. Now, on the internet, there's a nice little thing up there. It's on the internet. Almost nobody knows that you're a dog. This is certainly true now. Now, we have web pages that when you visit them, they can tell where you've surfed, they can tell where you're logged into, perhaps your gender, they can scan your internet, what you can connect to. What if, just what if, a web page could see and hear you? What would that enable? That could enable corporate espionage, government surveillance, spying on home users. Practically speaking, every computer with a webcam or a microphone will become a remote monitoring device, something that you wouldn't see or expect. The problem is we're pretty good with JavaScript, for just doing these minor things. But JavaScript, to the best of our knowledge, doesn't have access to the webcam or microphone. So in our line of work, if JavaScript can't do it, you ask Daddy Flash. Flash has tremendous penetration. This is their latest statistics. In the latest version of Flash, the Flash player, not the end, the 90115, in mature markets, they call it, has over 80% penetration. Flash Player 9, the one just before, has just over 97%. Huge penetration. And the great part about Flash is it does have access to the the camera and microphone. So let me show you how this works. Let's see here. Where we got? Where we are. Okay. Now, we created a little Swift file, and I'm going to show you the code here. I can't see it, so I'm going to make this screen a little smaller here so I can see it. All right, this is what we call CamJack2. All this is a simple web page that's calling in a Swift file. And draw your attention here to this W mode equals transparent here. This is very important to pull off, but it's just calling in one Swift file here. And when the Swift file loads, it asks you for permissions to access the camera and microphone. Obviously, you want to give permissions before somebody accesses your camera and microphone, I would imagine. All right, so we had this particular thing here, so that was pretty interesting. Now, what we wanted to do next is we wanted to iframe this in so we can get it to follow the mouse. Okay, so what we did was we have this CamJack HTML thing here, and this is right here. Again, mouse follower code up above, iframes in the code, the CamJack2 HTML. So the first thing we're going to do here is, so you can actually see this in action here, is we're going to position this iframe here up to the top left. Okay? Very important that we do this. So we don't need that anymore, so we're going to focus here. So again, we're going to follow the mouse just a little bit here, okay? Now, we don't want it to be that big. We want it to be a little bit smaller. Actually, let's leave that a second. Now, the problem is, you can see this, right? The user can see this. We didn't like that. So we did this really, really clever hack here. It's called Moz opacity. And we found out that you can just do that, depending on the browser that you're in, and make it transparent. You can drop it all the way down, right? You can probably see that a little bit. Let's try it again. And you can drop it down to make it, almost imperceptible. Now, so we can still see it. We'd like to make it a little bit more harder to see. Let's see here. Where are we? Does that cam jack? Yeah, good. We're going to slow this down here and put it 50 and 10. Just make the iframe smaller that we're clicking in. And also, we got this little thing here. Okay? Now, you can make this, again, transparent, which it's only not because, we want, if I made it invisible, it wouldn't be a very, very impressive demo. So if the user clicks on it, now, before I do, I want you to show this screen here. Okay? This is actually just showing images, but there's no images now to display. And if you're familiar with Macs have a built-in eyesight camera here that turns on green when the camera is activated. So I'm only able to see that right here. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to, let's say we're going to try to click on this link here. All right? Now, right now, the camera, my light is now turned on. Okay? The camera is actually connecting. That little blurb here, that's actually me behind the scenes. It's only visible because I want it to be visible for our purposes here. Okay, and we made this Swift code so it's motion sensitive. So it's a motion sensitive video capture device. You just turn it on, and it just starts snapping pictures of you. And if you wanted to, you can have it listen to you and everything like that. This is making me a little nervous here, so I'm going to just do that there, and my camera's going to turn off. So again, that's what we're seeing behind the scenes. We're just making it smaller. So all of a sudden, a web page can see and hear you, and you won't know. Who has Flash turned on? Nobody, right? Yeah, right. Okay, so everybody got real quiet. Giving a newfound sense of paranoia yet? All right. So let's just go forward a little bit here. So again, we can make these Flash dialogues transparent till they're almost imperceptible. And, that's the code there that does it. We have, that's the normal stuff there we looked at. There's another way to do it. If you want to also make it invisible another way, let's say you can't make it transparent for whatever reason, you could throw stuff over it and put the allow button, whatever you want, and do it that way. So this was pretty cool. We have web pages that can spy on people now. But we also found this other little thing. Now, I have this queued up in my web browser here. Now, when you want to configure your security permissions in Flash, you actually go to this website, onmacromedia.com. Who here has actually seen this? Two people. Very, very few people. Even the experts, even Flash developers have never seen this. This is how you actually configure the security preferences of your Flash player. You go to a macromedia.com website and you load this particular Swift and you can change your permissions. What does this say here? This says some websites may access information from other sites using an older system of security. This is usually harmless, but it's possible that some sites could obtain unauthorized information using the older system. When a website attempts to use the older system to access, attempts to use the older system to access information. What this actually does is it controls the security of your Flash player. Now, if you just click that little green button there, that means Flash can do whatever it wants to your camera, your desktop, and there is no permissions dialog. Okay? All right. There's also things, we'll show it in the little thing here. Let's go a little bit forward. Go back. All right. Again, you can set up, there's things called Flash cookies in there. You can see the sites you've been to that you've granted permissions. All that stuff's in there. If we can clickjack that, we can cause a whole lot of harm, and no one would be the wiser. Okay? So now, I'm going to show you another little proof of concept code demo here. Now, I'm going to show you, let's see here, where is the, right here. This is the code. This is all you need to do this type of hack. And a login screen you put on some website somewhere, any site that you want that you've built. It's a curious little always allow in there, huh? How many people would actually notice that? You know, once you click on it. All right. So you just instantly turn off flash security. You actually turn off the security of the actual computer itself. And there's, lots and lots of nasty things you can do with this stuff. So I'm not going to click that button. So we got all this research together, myself and Robert Hansen. We had all this research together, and we were like, okay, this is cool, and the browser vendors know about this, so we're really not having found any new 0 days or whatever, right? And but we had enough for an interesting paper, at least to say, clickjacking is a little bit worse than people gave it credit for. So we submitted a call for papers to OWASP AppSec in New York early October. And we had a new white paper developed. We wrote something. We had everything going. And we had really good relationships going with Mozilla, Microsoft, and Adobe. We've worked on different things together with them. So at a professional courtesy, we shared with them our research. And this is when all hell broke loose. Adobe emails us back and goes, why the hell are you 0-daying us? And to us, clickjacking looks like a browser flaw, and we were just using Flash to prove a point. And so we were saying, 0 day? What's 0 day? This is a browser problem. Now, apparently, the act of making the Flash security dialogues transparent is a vulnerability that they missed in Firefox 3. So we actually found a 0 day, and we just didn't know it, which is a brand new one for us. So we called the conference organizer, we explained the situation, or communicating with Adobe, and we figured we didn't want to go forth and do the whole clickjacking talk going like, yeah, you can force a user to click on dig and Twitter buttons, right? The whole video jacking thing was being much cooler. So we contacted the conference organizer, and they said, we understand if you got to pull the talk, it's disappointing. And so we pulled the talk, and Arsenic and myself and Adobe issued statements that say, we didn't give them much time, so professional courtesy, we gave them more time to patch the issue. To protect their own users independently of what the browser vendors did. And you know what? I just found out that my camera is still on, and I'm not excited about that. Let's see, how many, actually out of curiosity. Okay, that's not good. Let's close all this stuff down. Okay, so let's go forth a little bit. So we gave Adobe more time and, canceled the talk, and all of a sudden the media went nuts. The red flags went up, JeremiahGrossman, Robert Hansen, got held down by the man, by Adobe, and emails started flying, phones started ringing off the hook, and it was generally not a very fun experience, but we made the best of it. And this is where we got caught up in the whole partial disclosure thing, even though we really didn't want to. We wanted to share everybody with, what we had found, all around, but really couldn't do so. So there's a certain level of skepticism out there, and people were calling, this is lame, partial disclosure, you're all jerks, this is all hype, blah, blah, blah. And this is really, really annoying because we had every intention of putting everything out there. The browser vendors had a different type of response. They said, well, we'll look closer at clickjacking and see what we can do. I said, okay. And then the researchers, all the other researchers wanted to know what it is. They were asking us, is this it? No. Is this it? No. Is this it? We can neither confirm nor deny. It didn't take them at least one person very long to figure out what we did and how to replicate it. And over the next 2 weeks, 3 others did, and we pointed them towards Adobe. And then Giorgio Maone, who develops NoScript, he goes, I could fix this, no problem. And he tried it once, and it worked pretty well. Somebody found a way around it, fixed it again, somebody found a way around it, and on it goes. NoScript is cool, but it's definitely not the end-all, be-all. Dylan calls me up and says, hey, want to give a keynote on clickjacking and hacking the box? I was like, oh, sure, but I don't know how I'm going to be able to do it since it's still embargoed. And then a guy, I'm not even going to begin to pronounce his last name, he's finds the flaw, spills the beans on his blog, shows a video demo and provides the code on how to do it on video jacking, and then the whole, everything else exploited on there. That's why there's 700,000 links on it everywhere. So this is, our chronological order. Disclosure sucks. I don't want to ever do it again. But this is the state of things out there, and this is what we're talking about here today. So now we get to talk about defenses. What are we doing with this stuff here? So if you run a website and you want to help defend your website against the whole clickjacking thing, you can add frame busting code, and that's the top little block there to make sure nobody can iframe your site in. It's a little one-line JavaScript code that bursts out of its skin if somebody tries to frame it. The problem is that you have this little thing in IE, iframe. When you iframe something in, you can put a little thing called security equals restricted in, which puts it in the restricted zone and also disables JavaScript. Very ironically, turning off JavaScript in your browser makes you less secure. So what happens here is if a bad guy wants to iframe in a particular piece of code, they do security equals restricted, and that button will show up and cause the user to click. It can't follow the mouse. Well, actually, it still can. So what you have to do 2 things. One, you have to put frame busting code in, and your submit button for your important forms have to require JavaScript to execute properly. So if they do security equals restricted, it'll break the JavaScript in your page. I would not call this a best practice because it's a month old, but this is the best anybody's come up with. Again, to protect a little bit further, depending on the nature of your site, you can do out-of-band confirmation using email or SMS, and you can also do some refer checking if you want to. But this is the best we got here. This is the website's attempt to compensate for the insecurity of the browser. So what's going on with the browser here? Adobe has, thankfully, they have upgraded to Flash 10. That's the latest stable release that does the best job that they can of fixing on a shortened time frame of protecting against clickjacking. If you're at all concerned about this, please upgrade. You can install NoScript, and they have Giorgio put in a new technology called ClearClick, where you can either disable iframes altogether, or you can make iframes visible and prevents them from being made transparent. You can also use Flash Block, which blocks Flash altogether. You can disable plugins if you want, and you can also virtualize. Now, cool stuff, effective to some extent, are ways to get around it. I prefer going the very paranoid route, and I prefer tape, and disabling the microphone altogether. So, turning off your, I heard some people at the conference, I forget who it was here, but they actually pulled the microphone wire out of their computer. You can mute it, disable it, tape over your, if you have, prior to the conference here, everybody at White Hat had Post-it notes over the camera. And there's also ongoing stuff going on out there and how to address the larger scale problems. There's a project out there called Content Security Policy, which will define what some code on a website is supposed to be able to do, kind of communicates to the browser and how to treat the code on the site. Hopefully an effort that will help secure some of the widget type Web 2.0 apps out there, because right now, if you're putting a widget on your site, and widget will mean any banner advertisements, Google Clock, a JavaScript counter, it is impossible to secure that environment. Once you put in a piece of code, a third-party JavaScript code on your site, all bets are off. They can do whatever they want to you. Michael Zalewski, another good web security guy, works at Google. He calls clickjacking something UI redressing. He's put forth a bunch of ideas on how browser vendors can fix this stuff. The problem is new security features to handle these semantic type flaws are long in coming, because there is what we call a conflict of interest in the browser world. If you go to the safest web browser in the world, just to kind of put that in context, what happens later is that you have features, HTTP only. HTTP only is put out there, wasn't like spec'd in or anything like that by RFC, but it took 5 years before, which is a neat little feature, HTTP only, but it took 5 years for Firefox to actually put it in. So what happens is that if you're a browser vendor and you're looking to develop a product, a widely scaled product, security plays second fiddle to user base. You will not put a feature in, security or otherwise, needed or otherwise, if it does not, if it hinders market share adoption. Because from their perspective, and it's understandable, but this is what it is. I won't try to point fingers, but I wanted to describe the conflicts of interest here. It's better to be insecure and adopted rather than secure and obscure. So what happens is you have these insecure browsers. A problem becomes known. You have things like NoScript added on, or let's say the early days, the anti-phishing toolbars by Netcraft, eBay. Only later do they get integrated as core features in the browsers 5 years after the type of attack becomes well known. Same thing is happening in NoScript right now. NoScript has a bunch of anti-cross-site scripting stuff. The features themselves are now showing up in IE8 now. Not a whole lot of market share, but they're showing up. At some point forward, we will get some other features in there to secure the browser against attacks that we had 5 years ago. That's the problem out there. So what's going to happen is we're going to continue to have these, let's say, insecure products that we have to put security add-ons on, that when they get a large enough user share, then they'll put them in the main browser. It's not a happy place, but it is where we are. So my advice, if you want to surf with a popular web browser, you're going to have to put every single security add-on you can find on it to protect yourself. If you want to, let's say what I do for my parents, if you want to keep them from getting hacked, I install rather obscure browsers for them, the ones with very little market share, the ones that aren't targeted. It's not really going to help them against clickjacking, but it will help them against all the other, memory-based stack allocation issues. We're running up on 12 minutes of time, so I'll wrap it up here. So web security is it's a broad topic. It's very complicated. There's people that specialize in the security of the website, secure software development, and there's a whole other set of people out there that focus on browser security. But unless we can get our arms around both of these, it's not going to make, this stuff is going to continue to happen. Our browser security is probably no less than 5 years behind the new eras of attack. So I just wanted to bring that forward, share with you what I know, and hopefully this presentation has given you that and show you a little bit about what's possible out there. How much time do we have left for questions? 13 minutes? It's probably enough. Hopefully there's questions, otherwise we're going to end very early. And questions, please. Nobody wants to go first? No questions at all. Oh, okay, good. Willing person.
I'll go first. So I guess my question would be, what would you have the browsers do?
What would I have browsers do? Wish list? If we go back to the content security policy, that will define, websites have no choice now of, they want to add content on their sites that were developed by third parties, Facebook, MySpace, Google, whatever. There's actually no way to safely add security on those particular sites. I would love something like content security policy so I can define a policy on what those web widgets are allowed to do. I would take that one. Great. That'd be nice.
So, but for clickjacking?
Oh, for clickjacking in general? I've seen some very nice ideas. I don't know about clickjacking, to be plainly honest with you. I don't know about clickjacking at all. I've seen some nice ideas that will generally break the web. Good question. Don't know. Sorry.
Okay.
Any other questions? Either that was a very complete talk or, all right. Oh, excellent.
Sorry, this may be pretty obvious, but with the clickjacking attack where you've got the hidden iframe,
Yeah.
The user obviously can't click on the element that's behind that, right?
They actually want to click on, what's behind the iframe, correct?
Right, but they won't be.
They won't be able to.
Yeah, so the functionality of the site would be broken at that point.
I'm sorry, one more time?
The functionality of the site would be broken at that point.
Oh, if the bad guy wanted to make it seamless, they can tell the XY coordinates of what the user intended to click on and manufacture that request and redirect them off if they wanted to after the initial click. They could do that to make it a little bit more seamless. I probably committed this act, but if for whatever reason, if I've been clickjacked, I'll clickjack, and if the link didn't click, I probably wouldn't notice anyway, and it would click again anyway. So it'd probably be lost in the shuffle then anyway. Now we're rolling. All right.
Hi. Scary stuff. Can I safely say that with all this stuff, it's all due to all the flashy stuff, and Web 2.0 is inherently insecure with all this stuff like Facebooks and social networking sites and rich content. It's inherently insecure. Can I say that?
Having trouble with the question.
You see, what I noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, with all this stuff is caused by rich content.
Right.
And Web 2.0 is all about rich content.
Yeah.
So can I say, we're going to get even scarier with Web 2.0?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way we're getting away from these technologies. We're definitely not going to move backwards. Flash has been out there for a long, long time, so whether a site uses Web 2.0 technology or not, these attacks have been possible for a long, long time. It's perhaps possible that Robert Hansen and myself weren't the smartest guys around, and other people found these out a long time ago and generated their own personal and private social networks, complete with your picture. But we're going to see this more and more. The web is becoming, it's kind of cliche, but it is coming a platform, and people are wanting to make apps that go on top of your iPhone. You know, it's just just JavaScript. Apps that go on your Facebook profiles. I just saw recently that widgets have now been added to Gmail, which is a little creepy. But it's going to happen, and browsers are going to have to come up to speed and address these issues. Perhaps they won't. Just like everything else in security, we'll wait for them for a big outbreak to occur, and then we'll deal with it later, and everybody will have to recode and rejigger things and upgrade. So maybe we're waiting for something really bad to happen, which tends to be how we deal with things in security. We didn't have really good patch management until large-scale virus outbreaks came, like Slammer and Blaster, and then we got patch management involved and things like that. So, for those that are not familiar with the SAMI worm, the SAMI worm, that affected MySpace and infected over 1 million profiles in 24 hours. That showed what the power of cross-site scripting actually is. And then people started to take it a little bit seriously. So maybe we'll see the next outbreak of this stuff where people's privacy is severely and seriously violated, and then we'll do something about it, and maybe not till then.
Which browsers are patched now against some of the specific techniques that you used, or I wasn't 100% clear on that. And also, did you guys do any testing with IE8?
Good question. Okay, so all the early demos with the history stealing stuff, some is fixed in some browsers, some not. It's all over the map as far as what hacks work. The Flash one, the clickjacking stuff is not fixed in any browser. It's only remediated by upgrading to Flash 10 or installing NoScript. So all the clickjacking stuff is primarily still there. And your second question was, what was again?
I was just curious if you guys did any research with Internet Explorer 8.
Oh, IE8. We were messing around with IE8, and we did find some other vulnerabilities that carried the attack further. I can't describe what they were, because I don't know if they patched it or not. But this should work. I couldn't tell you with absolute certainty, but it all should work fine, provided there's Flash installed. We didn't test on Google Chrome either. I mean, if it used Flash, it should technically work if you can make the Flash player transparent. So. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much for your time. Hopefully it was informative. Enjoy the conference. It's my pleasure being here.
Thank you very much, Mr. JeremiahGrossman. You know how to use the browser. Want to go whack your girlfriend's mother or what? Oh, very gao. Our next keynote speaker, this man long time one. People, Uncle Ho age, we know the fellow already, you know. He got right the FWTK firewall toolkit. Damn cow, very good. Long time firewall toolkit. Long time people know this man. Mr. Marcus Ranom. He world-renowned expert on the security system design and the implementation. Very early innovator, the firewall technology, the FWTK law, and also implementer of the first commercial firewall product. Wow, damn cow, sure make lot of money one. This one must buy share.